The kind of street where everyone knows what car you drive, but nobody actually knows you. That's where I grew up. Maple Grove, Ohio. A suburb that takes itself too seriously. Manicured lawns, HOA newsletters, neighbors who wave from driveways but never come inside. My parents bought that house in 1971 and never left. Neither did my brother. I did. But every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every New Year's Eve, I came back. Not because I missed the house, because of my aunt. Aunt Louise, 73 years old, makes the best pecan pie in the state and still writes birthday cards by hand. She's the reason I kept showing up. My brother's name is Keith. He's 4 years younger than me. 54 to my 58. And if you ask anyone in that neighborhood who the successful one is, they'll tell you Keith. Without hesitating, Keith has the house on Birchwood Lane, the one with the 3-car garage and the stone front steps my parents always admired. Keith has the title, Regional Sales Director. He says it the way some men say Harvard, slowly, so it lands. He has the country club membership and the wife who coordinates her outfits with the seasonal decor and the 2 kids who go to the right schools. I have a pickup truck with 140,000 miles on it. At least, that's what Keith sees when he looks at me. We were never close the way brothers in movies are close. We didn't have that. What we had was a kind of low-grade competition that Keith ran and I didn't know I was supposed to enter. When we were kids, he was the one who got the trophies. Soccer, debate team, student council. I was quieter. I liked taking things apart and figuring out how they worked. I spent most of high school in the garage rebuilding an old motorcycle engine that never actually ran. My dad used to say, not unkindly, Ted's just a different kind of kid. Keith never let me forget that phrase. By the time I was 35, I left Ohio, built something of a life in western Pennsylvania, and mostly stopped explaining myself to people who'd already made up their minds about me. Keith had made up his mind a long time ago. I was the brother who never quite got it together, the one who rented when everyone else was buying. The one who showed up to family dinners without a +1 for so many years that it became a running joke nobody bothered to hide anymore. I didn't correct them. That was my choice. I want to be clear about that. Not some great mystery. Not some elaborate plan. Just a decision I made quietly and kept making every year. Some people share everything with their families. I learned early that sharing with Keith meant giving him ammunition. So I stopped. The New Year's Eve party at my parents' house is a tradition going back to before I was born. My mother started it. After she passed, my aunt kept it going. Same house, same neighborhood families, same 7-layered dit that nobody finishes. My parents' living room holds about 30 people if you open the French doors to the dining room, and every year it does. I drove up from Pennsylvania on the 30th, stopped at a Cracker Barrel off I-76 for coffee, and sat in the parking lot longer than I needed to. I don't know why, just wasn't in a hurry. Keith was already there when I arrived. Of course he was. He'd been helping my aunt set up, which meant he'd been standing in the kitchen telling her stories about his Q4 numbers while she actually did the work. He saw me come through the door and he smiled. Not warm, the other kind. Ted. He said it the way you'd say right on time when someone is late. Hey, Keith. My aunt came out from the kitchen with flour on her hands and hugged me properly. That's the thing about Aunt Louise. She's always happy to actually see you. Not your resume. You. The party filled up the way it always does. Neighbors I recognized but couldn't name. Keith's wife coordinating near the appetizer table. My cousin's teenagers staring at their phones in the corner. The usual. I found a spot near the window with a glass of sparkling cider. I don't drink much. And mostly listened. That's what I do at these things. I listen. You learn a lot about people when you stop trying to keep up with them. Keith found me around 9 o'clock. He had that loosened tie energy he gets after a few drinks. Not sloppy. Just confident in a way that tips over into something else. So what's new with you, Ted? He leaned against the wall next to me. Still doing the consultant thing. Still doing the consultant thing. Still doing it. He nodded slowly, like he was being patient. How's that working out? It's working out. He swirled his drink. That's good. That's good. Then you ever think about coming back to Ohio? Mom and Dad's house is going to need to be dealt with eventually, and it'd probably make more sense to have someone local involved. I'm aware. I'm just saying. He glanced across the room. It might be time, you know. You're what, 58 now? You're what, 58 now? At some point you've got to stop moving around and plant somewhere. I didn't say anything. He smiled. Still renting? Keith, I'm not judging. Look, I know the consulting world is unpredictable. If you ever need a connection, I've got some people at the regional office who, I'm fine. Okay. He held up his free hand. Okay, And then he said it. Casually. Like it was a thought he was just now having, not something he'd been saving. I just think at 58, it's time to have something to show for it, you know? A house. Something real. I'm not trying to be harsh, I'm being honest. Because I'm your brother. The room didn't go quiet. Nobody heard him except me. He said it quietly enough that it was just between us. Which is worse, actually. Witnesses would have made it embarrassing for him. This way it was just a gift he could give me privately. I looked at him for a moment. Then I sat my glass down on the windowsill, said, "Excuse me," and went to find Aunt Louise. She was in the kitchen cutting the pecan pie. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her, and she didn't ask me what was wrong. She just handed me the first slice and sat down across from me. "He say something?" she asked. "He always says something." She nodded. We ate pie. That was enough. I drove back to Pennsylvania on the 2nd of January. I want to tell you what I went back to, because Keith's version of my life, the one he'd been constructing for decades, deserves to be set next to the actual thing. I live in a house outside of Ligonier, Pennsylvania. Stone and timber, built in 1962 on 11 acres that back up to a state forest. I bought it 14 years ago when the owner, an old man named Ed who'd run a machine shop for 40 years, passed away, and his kids just wanted it gone. I paid cash. I'm not a consultant exactly. I say that because it's simpler. What I actually do is own a small engineering firm. 6 employees, 1 office, and a specialty in industrial equipment retrofitting. We take old manufacturing systems and make them work with modern controls. It is not glamorous. It is not something you explain at a party, but it's been quietly, consistently profitable for 21 years. My wife's name is Helen. She's a nurse practitioner who runs a small rural health clinic 40 minutes from our house. We have been married for 17 years. We have a son, Eli, who is 15 and is very serious about lacrosse and not very serious about math, which his mother and I disagree about how to handle. We have a daughter, June, who is 12 and has already decided she wants to be a marine biologist, mostly because of a book about octopuses she read in 4th grade. Nobody in my family knows about them. I need to explain that because I know how it sounds. When I was 38, I met Helen at a Chamber of Commerce dinner. I attended only because a client invited me and I didn't want to be rude. She was there because the clinic was applying for a community health grant. We talked for most of the evening. I asked for her number. She said she'd have to think about it, which I respected. She called me 3 days later. We were engaged within a year. We got married at the Ligonier Valley Historical Society, 17 guests, a cold October day with leaves coming down outside the windows. It was the best day of my life. And Keith wasn't there because I didn't invite him. The reason isn't complicated. I had spent my entire life watching Keith take things I valued and find a way to make them smaller. My grades, my first car, my first real job offer, which he called entry level at a family dinner in front of everyone. I decided before I even proposed to Helen that I wasn't going to hand him my marriage. That was mine. That was ours. I told myself I'd tell the family eventually. When things settled, when I felt ready, 17 years passed. I'm not proud of that part. Helen understood, mostly because she'd met Keith once, briefly at my father's funeral 8 years ago, and that was enough for her. She'd read him in under an hour. But she also, gently and then less gently over the years, pointed out that Aunt Louise wasn't Keith, that my cousins weren't Keith, that my cousins weren't Keith, that my kids deserved to know where half of their DNA came from. She was right. I knew she was right. I just kept putting it off. The call came in late February. It was Keith. He never calls. We communicate mostly through the family group text that my aunt set up and nobody uses except her. So when I saw his name on my phone on a Tuesday afternoon, I knew it wasn't social. Hey. His voice was different. Quieter. Keith, what's going on? There was a pause. I need to talk to you about something. I'd rather do it in person, but another pause. It's financial. I'm in a situation. I waited. The regional position got restructured. I'm still employed, but the base dropped significantly. And I've got the mortgage on the Birchwood house, the club dues, the kids' tuitions, private school for both. You know how it is. And some things I maybe shouldn't have committed to when things were better. He cleared his throat. I'm about 60,000 short of where I need to be to keep everything from unraveling. $60,000. He said it like he practiced it, which he probably had. What are you asking me, Keith? I'm asking if you could help. A loan, not a gift. A loan, not a gift. A loan, not a gift. I'll draw up whatever paperwork you want. I sat with that for a moment, thought about the window. The sparkling cider. It's time to have something to show for it. I'll come down, I said. Next weekend, we'll talk. He sounded relieved in a way that bothered me a little, like he'd already decided I'd say yes, like it had never occurred to him that I might not be the brother he'd always assumed I was. I drove down on a Saturday morning. Didn't tell my aunt I was coming. I went straight to Keith's house, the free-car garage, the stone steps. He answered the door in a fleece vest and khakis. Weekend Keith. He looked tired. His wife wasn't home. She'd taken the kids to a swim meet. He'd timed it that way, I assumed. We sat at the kitchen table. He had coffee ready. He slid a folder across to me. Spreadsheets, account statements, a list of what he owed and to whom. I'll give him credit for that. He came prepared. I looked through everything carefully. Took about 20 minutes. He sat quietly. When I was done, I said, "What happened to the investments you had through Merrill Lynch? Your advisor was Ted Simmons, right? You mentioned him at Christmas a few years ago." Keith looked up. "How do you know about that?" "Because I pay attention, Keith. You talk about your finances at every family gathering." He cleared his throat. "I liquidated most of that. Bad timing with the market, and I needed to cover some things." "Okay." I closed the folder. "Here's what I can do. I can help you restructure this. Not with $60,000. Because handing someone $60,000 when the underlying spending habits haven't changed doesn't actually fix anything. You know that." He started to say something. Let me finish. I kept my voice level. "I can contribute $20,000 toward the highest interest debt. The rest, we're going to look at what can be renegotiated, what can be sold, and what the actual monthly number needs to be for you to stay solvent without the club membership and the lease on the BMW. His jaw tightened. "The BMW is your lease is $987 a month. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what the math says." He was quiet for a long time. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked. Why not just say no? "Because you're my brother." And I meant it. Despite everything. "But I'm not going to write you a check that lets you keep making the same decisions. That's not helping you." He nodded slowly. The Merrill Lynch question was still sitting in his head. I could see it. "Ted," he said, "how are you doing this? You do consulting. You drive a... My truck is paid off," I said. "That's the point." He looked at me differently then. Not with gratitude, exactly. More like the beginning of a question he didn't know how to ask yet. I let him sit with it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my cousin Diane. Which was unusual. Diana and I exchanged birthday texts, and that's about it. "Ted," she said, "did something happen between you and Keith? He came over for dinner last week and he was different. He kept asking about you. Asking what you actually do. Whether I knew anything about your life in Pennsylvania. What did you tell him?" "That I didn't know." "Which is true." She paused. "Is there something to know?" I thought about Helen. About Eli and his lacrosse schedule. About June and her octopus books piled on the coffee table. About the 11 acres with the deer that come up to the tree line in the evenings. "There's something to know," I said. "I've been meaning to do this for a while, Diane. I'm sorry I waited so long, I told her. She was quiet for almost a full minute. Then you've been married for 17 years. Yes. And you have 2 kids, Ellie and June. Another pause. Ted, Aunt Louise is she's going to lose her mind. I know. She's going to be so happy she's going to cry. I know. And then she might actually kill you. Also fair. I called Aunt Louise that evening. Helen sat next to me on the couch, her hand on my knee. Eli was upstairs. June was doing homework at the kitchen table and kept glancing over at me with the slightly suspicious look she gets when she knows something is happening that adults aren't explaining. Aunt Louise answered on the second ring. I told her everything. Slowly. Carefully. I didn't make excuses, but I did explain. I told her about the years of watching Keith use information as a weapon. About the decision I'd made to keep my own life close. About how the decision that made sense at 38 had somehow become 17 years without me ever choosing that specifically. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "How old?" 15 and 12. She made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not quite crying. Something older than that. 15 years, she said. Ted. I know, Aunt Louise. I know. You bring them here. You bring that family here. You bring that family here. You understand me? Yes, ma'am. I have a great nephew and a great niece I've never. Her voice broke. She stopped, collected herself. You bring them in the spring. We'll do Easter. We'll be there. Helen was crying quietly next to me. She'd never heard any of this out loud before, not from my side, in my voice being said to the person it most needed to be said to. I think it landed differently for her, too. June came over from the kitchen table and leaned against my arm without asking what was going on. She just knew something was happening, and she wanted to be close. Kids are like that sometimes. We came for Easter. My aunt's house, same neighborhood, different address. She's in the smaller place on the corner that she moved into after my uncle passed. She had the table set for 10, which felt like an optimistic number for what was actually a first meeting with half the people there. But that's Aunt Louise. She plans for the version of things she hopes will happen. Eli was polite in the way. 15-year-olds are polite when they're somewhere unfamiliar and don't want to say the wrong thing. June shook my aunt's hand with great seriousness, and then immediately started asking about the framed cross-stitch of a lighthouse on the wall, and whether my aunt had made it herself, which was exactly the right question to ask, and within 4 minutes they were in the living room together examining it up close. Keith was there. I hadn't told him we were coming. My aunt had. He was standing by the buffet when we walked in. He saw Helen first, then the kids, then looked at me with an expression I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't anger. It was something more like vertigo. Like the floor had shifted slightly and he was recalibrating. He walked over. "This is your family," he said. "Not a question. This is my family." I put my hand on Helen's shoulder. My wife, Helen. Our son, Eli. Our daughter, June. Helen shook his hand. She smiled the way she smiles when she's being professional, warm but deliberate. She'd earned that smile. She'd been patient for 17 years. Keith looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the kids. Eli was tall, taller than me. June had her mother's eyes. They were clearly not recent additions to my life. 17 years, he asked quietly. 17 years. He nodded slowly. His jaw moved like he was working through something. Then, "Why didn't you tell me?" "You know why, Keith." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded again, and this time it was a different nod. A smaller one. The kind that means I understand more than I want to admit. He went and introduced himself to Eli. They talked about football for a few minutes. I watched from across the room. My aunt came out of the kitchen and took my arm without saying anything. Just stood next to me, watching her table fill up with people, watching June carry on an animated conversation with a cousin she'd never met before. "You're still in trouble," my aunt said. "I know, but not today. No, but not today. No, not today." The $20,000 I lent to Keith, he paid back $8,000 of it over the following year in quarterly installments that he set up himself without me asking. He sold the BMW and drives a used Camry now. He left the country club. He doesn't say things at parties anymore, at least not to me. Something shifted after Easter, not repaired. I want to be careful about that word, but different, like a piece of furniture that got moved slightly, and now the room has a little more space in it. My kids spent 3 days in Ohio that Easter weekend. June decided Aunt Louise was her favorite person she'd ever met, which Aunt Louise will never let any of us forget. Eli found out he and one of my cousin's sons are about the same skill level at basketball, which led to a 2-hour game in the driveway that I watched from the porch. Helen sat with Aunt Louise in the kitchen for almost an hour on Sunday morning, just the two of them. I don't know what they talked about. I didn't ask. Some conversations don't belong to me. When we drove home Sunday evening, heading back east on Route 30 as the sun came down behind us, June fell asleep in the back seat. Eli had his headphones on. Helen had her feet up on the dashboard, a habit she has that I've never told her bothers me. Because it doesn't. I drove and didn't think about Keith. Didn't think about the window at the New Year's party or the sparkling cider or something to show for it. I thought about the state forest behind the house, the way it looks in April. That particular green that only lasts about 2 weeks before it deepens into summer. The deer that come up in the evenings. Ed's old stone house that I'd filled up slowly and without advertising it, with the life I wanted. Plenty to show for it. Nobody needed to know. I thought about that New Year's Eve a lot since then. Not with anger, that surprised me, honestly. I thought I'd carry it differently. But what I keep coming back to isn't what Keith said. It's what I didn't say back. There was a time in my life when I would have corrected him right there at the window, with a sparkling cider in my hand and 30 people in the next room. I would have felt the need to prove something. To lay it all out, the house, the firm, the family I'd built quietly on 11 acres in western Pennsylvania. I would have watched his face change and told myself that felt like winning. It doesn't, though. I know that now. Winning a moment like that costs you something you don't get back. What Keith did to me over the years. The comments, the comparisons, the patient, deliberate work of making me feel like less. That came from a place in him that had nothing to do with me. I understand that now in a way I couldn't when I was younger. People who need to shrink others are usually working very hard to avoid looking at themselves. Keith's whole life was built around appearances. The house, the title, the club membership. When the structure started cracking, he had nothing underneath it. That's not a character flaw I want to punish. It's a kind of poverty I wouldn't wish on anyone. But understanding that doesn't mean absorbing it indefinitely. There's a version of patience that's really just avoidance with better posture. I did that for years, kept coming back to those family dinners, kept deflecting Keith's digs with silence, told myself I was taking the high road when really I was just postponing a conversation I didn't want to have, with him, with my aunt, with myself. The decision I made when I was 38, to keep Helen, to keep my kids, to keep my actual life away from someone who had a history of making things I loved feel smaller, that was the right call. I stand by it, but I held on to it too long, and the people who didn't deserve to be kept out got kept out anyway. Aunt Louise didn't get 17 years of June and Eli. That's on me. That's the part I have to sit with. What I've learned, slowly, the way you learn things that actually matter, is that integrity isn't the same as secrecy. You can protect what's yours without disappearing. You can refuse to hand someone ammunition without building a wall around everything you love. I blurred that line for a long time and called it principle when some of it was just fear. Eli is 16 now. He knows the full story. He asked me once, driving home from a lacrosse tournament, why I hadn't told the family sooner. I didn't have a clean answer. I told him the truth. I was protecting what mattered to me, and I kept it up longer than I should have, and those two things can both be true at the same time. He thought about it for a while. Then he said, "So you fixed it, though?" "Yeah, eventually. I fixed it. That's the thing about cause and effect. It doesn't always move in straight lines. Sometimes the consequences of a good decision and a bad one get tangled up together, and you spend years sorting them out. What matters is that you keep sorting, that you don't let the untangling become an excuse to stop. Keith paid back $8,000. He drives a Camry now. I think he's a little more honest with himself than he used to be. That's something. June still calls Aunt Louise every Sunday. That's everything.